Now go back some 50 or 60 years ago and listen to women speaking, and most will sound very different. Let's just take a look, or listen, rather.
He fell off, and I picked him out of the dust and held him in my arms. He always said I hugged him before I ever even knew his name.
And they both knew right away?
Of course.
Come on, say good morning.
How about feeding a hungry husband?
Certainly, darling. And I have a surprise for you this morning.
Well, after all, Richard, you're the one that can make her understand.
Think so?
Have it out with her. I'm certain you can prove to her which is more important. You or that, Carl, or whatever his name is, who runs that awful place on the Bowery.
So what did you notice? It seems women today speak at a deeper pitch than either their mothers or grandmothers would have done. Anne Karpf is a columnist, sociologist and writer of such books as The Human Voice and joins me now from London. Anne, thank you so much for being with us. Scientists at the University of South Australia compared recordings of women talking in the 1940s with more recent recordings taken in the early 1990s. Now, they say with more women working than ever before, we're adopting a deeper tone to project authority and dominance in the workplace. Would you agree?
I think that's probably true. I mean, certainly that research by Cecilia Pemberton's really interesting, and it's been replicated more recently in other countries around the world. I mean, we don't know for certain the reasons. We can speculate, and probably there's more than one reason. But almost certainly it's because men in every sphere of life, let's face it, are the benchmark, and particularly in the workplace. And as more women have been entering the workplace, we have been trying more and more to sound like men, to adopt the kind of voice that is associated with authority and gravity. I mean, it's a really interesting question because the voice is one of the ways through which we sort of perform gender. So although obviously there are anatomical differences between men and women's voices, we sound more different than the anatomy requires us to, as it were. So it's clear that something is happening whereby what women think is the kind of voice that is effective is changing.
Are we doing harm to our vocal cords, however, by deepening our voices?
Take the example of Japan. Now, in Japan, women's voices were much higher than in other countries in the world, say the Netherlands, because countries where men and women are pretty much more socially equal, or the roles are defined more equally, the voices sound more similar. It's really interesting. In Japan, by contrast, what was seen as an attractive female voice was a very high-pitched voice for a long time, much more higher pitched than in other countries. And then that started to change. So what happened was that Japanese female broadcasters started to try and bring their voices down rather too deeply. And although most of us have many voices. Our voices aren't fixed. We have quite a wide vocal range. If you try and force your voice artificially low, you can damage it. And there is a lot of evidence that's emerged out of Japan that that's exactly what happened.
And what is so wrong with having a feminine voice?
Well, what a good question. What is wrong is the attitudes to it, the prejudice against women's voices, and boy, it's a long and rather shocking history. You know, it goes back to St. Paul, who said that it was shocking for women, shameful for women to speak in church, or, the women's voices, if they are high, have been described as squeaky or screeching. If they're low, they're considered sexual and evoking impure thoughts in men. So obviously the problem is the women's voice, not the men's thoughts. So there's been an enormously long history of prejudice against women's voices, and women are on a kind of double bind, because if they have the kind of voices that are associated with being, feminine, which are high voices generally, then disparaged as not being authoritative enough. If women then deepen their voices, they're either pushing them too low and damaging them, or described as trying to imitate men, or a really deep voice in a woman is associated with sexuality. So they're seen as not authoritative, but sexy. So it's a bit of a kind of no-win situation for women's voices at the moment.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Anne Karpf, speaking to us there
Thank
from
you.
London.